What would you do if love led you across 400 miles of pain, only to find betrayal waiting at the door? Tonight's story isn't just about heartbreak. It's about a woman who refused to break. Stay with me, because what Clara discovers on the other side of that door will challenge everything you believe about love, loyalty, and survival. If this story touched you, take a moment to like, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe so you don't miss the next story waiting just beyond the horizon.
9 miles left, that's what she told herself. Just 9 more miles. Look down at the road, dust and jagged rock. Now look at her feet. She had no boots. The leather had given out back around mile 60. Since then, rags, twine, and blood. Dark, dried blood that cracked open with every step she took. She wasn't walking anymore. She was dragging the ghost of her life behind her. 340 miles, barefoot, because a mother running toward hope doesn't stop for bleeding heels. Then she saw it, up on a small rise. A cabin. It looked exactly the way the letters had described it. 18 months ago, Elias had written to her about this very place. A red barn to the south, a single stubborn pine tree standing guard by the gate, her heart hammered against her ribs, like a wild bird trapped in her chest. She slowed down. She wanted to cry, but the tears wouldn't come. She was too dry for tears. She wanted to run, but her legs refused. Through the cracks in the wood, she saw the flicker of a fire, smoke curling from the stone chimney. Someone was home. Take a breath here. Think about a time you pushed past your own breaking point, walked further than your own bones said you could, just for someone you love. Hold on to that feeling, because Clara is about to knock. She reached the heavy wood. 3 knocks, weak, barely louder than the Wyoming wind. Footsteps inside, heavy, slow. The iron latch slid back. Lamplight spilled out into the bitter cold, and Clara's world stopped turning. The man standing there was not Elias. He was taller, broader in the shoulders. His flannel shirt was dusted with wood shavings, and his face. A jagged, pale scar ran from his hairline straight down his left cheek. His eyes were gray, and right now they were looking at her like she was a phantom. Clara's lips parted. Her voice was nothing but dried leaves scraping together. Elias? Elias Bennett? This is Elias Bennett's house. The stranger didn't move. He looked down at her battered, ruined feet, at the mud and blood on her hem. His voice was low, careful. Ma'am, I don't know the man you're looking for. My name is Tom Merrick, and this house is mine. Clara didn't blink. She couldn't pull air into her lungs. She looked past his broad shoulder, into the warm cabin. There it was, the wooden rocking chair by the hearth. Elias had built that chair. He wrote to her about it. "That's my husband's chair," she whispered. Her mind snapped, and her body finally followed. She didn't faint. She just gave up. Her knees buckled. She slid down the doorframe, hitting the hard porch wood. Tom Merrick didn't panic. He didn't grab her. Out on the frontier, you don't grab a wounded animal. He set his oil lamp down. He knelt, dropped right down to her eye level. "Ma'am," he said softly, "I don't know what kind of hell you just walked out of, but you aren't sleeping in the dirt tonight. I've got a fire. I've got hot water. And I've got bread." Clara looked at him. At the scar. At the stranger who wasn't her husband. She gave one slow nod. Tom stood. He opened the door wide, and he stepped aside. She had walked 400 miles to find the man who promised to love her. What she found instead was a stranger's door, and the kind of mercy she didn't think she'd live long enough to see. Morning didn't come with apologies, it just came. Pale gray light bled through the cabin windows. Clara opened her eyes. She was still in the rocking chair. She tried to move her feet. Fire shot up her shins. She looked down. Someone, Tom, had washed away the mud and the blood. Her feet were wrapped in clean white cotton. She turned her head. The cabin smelled of wood smoke and strong coffee. Tom Merrick was at the cast-iron stove. His back was to her. He moved quietly for a big man, no wasted motion. He pulled a tin cup down from a shelf, poured the dark coffee, and set it on the wooden table. Next to it, a heel of bread and a small dab of yellow butter. He didn't say a word. He just walked back to the stove. Clara cleared her throat. It felt like swallowing sand. "How long?" she asked. Tom stopped. "How long have you lived here, Mr. Merrick?" He turned around. The morning light caught that jagged scar on his face. It looked older in the daylight. He didn't look away from her. He didn't shuffle his boots. 9 months, he said. Clara closed her eyes. The math was simple. It was brutal. "You bought this place." "I did." From Elias Bennett. Tom gave a slow nod. "Yes, ma'am." Clara gripped the wooden arms of the rocking chair. Her knuckles turned white. "My husband wrote to me last November. He said he was putting a roof on the barn, getting it ready, for me, for our children." Tom didn't offer empty pity. Out here, pity didn't keep you warm. He just walked over to a heavy wooden trunk at the foot of his bed. He lifted the lid, rummaged around for a second. He pulled out a folded piece of heavy paper. He walked over to Clara, held it out. She took it. Her hands shook just a little. It was a deed of sale. Standard territory paperwork. She looked at the bottom line. There it was, Elias's signature. That sharp, slanted cursive she knew as well as her own name. Dated January 1881, 9 months ago. And the price, $340. Clara stared at the number, $340. That was what her waiting was worth. That was what her children's future was worth. A man trades his whole family for the price of a decent saddle and a train ticket. She didn't cry. The shock was too cold for tears. She just let the paper drop into her lap. "I waited," Clara said. Her voice was flat, empty. "He went west to claim land. Said he'd send for us. After January. The letters just stopped." Tom sat down on a stool across from her. He rested his forearms on his knees. He just listened. That was a rare thing in a man. "The money ran out," Clara continued. "The landlord back in Missouri wanted us out. My boy was getting a cough. I had no choice. I left my kids with my cousin, gathered every penny I had. I was coming to get him, or at least get the money he promised." She looked at the bandaged ruins of her feet. "Got off the train in Cheyenne. Someone bumped me on the platform. My coin purse was gone, every last cent. The ticket agent wouldn't help. The law was too busy." She looked up, met Tom's gray eyes. "So I walked." 400 miles, Tom said. It wasn't a question. Shoes gave out at mile 60. Tom stared at her. A long, quiet look, like he was sizing up a storm that had just blown through his front door. He stood up, walked over to the corner of the room near the wash basin. He knelt down, hooked his fingers under a floorboard, gave a hard yank. The board popped up. He reached into the dark space beneath and pulled out a small wooden cigar box. He walked back and set it on Clara's lap, right on top of the deed. "When I moved in," Tom said, his voice dropping low, "I found this under the floor. I didn't know what it was. Figured I should burn it. But I couldn't." Clara looked at the box. She traced the edge of the lid. Then she opened it. 3 things were inside. First, a small snippet of pale blonde hair, tied with a bit of thread. Lily's hair. Clara had sent it in her second letter. Second, a piece of brown paper. A charcoal drawing. 3 stick figures holding hands. A tall one, a medium one, a little one. Samuel had drawn it for his daddy. And third, a sealed envelope. Clara picked it up, addressed to her. The postmarked date stamped in the corner said March, 2 months after he sold the farm. Elias had written it, but he never sent it. He just buried it under the floorboards like a dead thing. Clara stared at the envelope. She could open it. She could read whatever lies or apologies he had penned. But she didn't. She put it back in the box, closed the lid. "You mind if I keep this?" she asked. Tom stood up. "It's yours, ma'am. Always was." Clara held the box to her chest. She had come all this way looking for a husband. She was leaving with a box full of ghosts. And a question that would keep her awake for a long time. If he wrote it in March, why did he leave it in the dark? 4 days. That's how long it took for the fever in Clara's feet to break. 4 days of Tom Merrick sleeping out in the barn with the horses, letting her have the cabin. He never complained, never even hinted that it was a bother. Every morning there was firewood by the stove, water in the basin. Today was Sunday. The air was sharp and cold. Winter was creeping down from the mountains. Tom hitched the wagon. He had to go into Pine Crossing for salt and supplies, and to post a letter. Clara hobbled out to the porch. She was wearing her dusty dress, but she had scrubbed her face clean. She leaned on a thick hickory walking stick Tom had carved for her. "I'm coming with you," she said. Tom paused, holding the reins. "Town's an 8-mile ride on a hard bench. You sure you're up for it?" "I didn't walk across Wyoming to hide in a cabin. I need to know if anyone saw where he went." Tom nodded once. He climbed down, offered her a hand, and helped her up onto the buckboard. The ride was quiet. The landscape out here was massive. Rolling hills of pale yellow grass stretching out until they hit the bruised purple of the horizon. It made a person feel small. Pine Crossing wasn't much of a town. A dusty main street, a Methodist church with a peeling white steeple, a bank built out of red brick, a general store, and about 200 people who knew everybody else's business. They rolled into town just as church was letting out. The timing couldn't have been worse. Dozens of people in their Sunday best stopped on the boardwalks. They turned, they stared. Tom Merrick was a ghost in this town. He kept to himself, bought his goods, paid in cash, rode out. Now here he was, driving a wagon with a strange, battered-looking woman sitting beside him. The whispers started before the horses even stopped. A stout woman in a gray wool dress broke from the crowd. Martha Granger ran the general store, knew every secret in the territory. "Tom Merrick," she called out, marching up to the wagon. Her eyes darted over Clara like a hawk spotting a field mouse. "Well now, who might this be?" Before Tom could open his mouth, Clara sat up straight. She ignored the pain in her feet. "My name is Clara Bennett," she said, her voice carrying over the quiet street. "I'm looking for my husband, Elias Bennett. He used to own the Red Hollow Ranch." Silence fell over the street, the kind of silence that rings in your ears. Martha Granger took a step back. She traded a look with a man standing near the bank. The man stepped off the boardwalk. He was dressed a little too well for a frontier town. Silk vest, polished boots, Silas Thorne, the banker. He tipped his hat, but his eyes were flat, cold. "Mrs. Bennett," Silas said smoothly. "I knew your husband. We did business, but I'm afraid you're too late." Clara's grip on the hickory stick tightened. "Where is he?" "Left these parts back in January, headed south. Denver, if my memory serves me right." Denver. The word hit Clara like a physical blow. He wasn't dead. He hadn't been killed by Indians or bandits or a hard winter. He was in Denver, alive, and he just hadn't cared enough to come home. The world tilted. She grabbed Tom's arm to steady herself. The whispers flared up again, louder this time. A married woman, abandoned, living alone out at Red Hollow with a widower. You could practically hear the judgment baking in their minds. Then a new voice cut through the noise. "That's enough staring for one Sabbath morning." The crowd parted. An older man stepped through. He wore a worn black suit and a collar. Pastor Ezra Hollis. White hair, kind eyes, and a thick Irish brogue that hadn't faded with the years. He walked right up to the wagon, looked at Clara, looked at Tom. "Mrs. Bennett," the pastor said warmly. "I'm Pastor Hollis. My wife's been gone 20 years, but I still make a decent pot of tea. Why don't you step down and join me in the parsonage? Mr. Merrick can handle his errands. I'll see you driven back before dark." It was a shield. The pastor was throwing his holy reputation right over her, protecting her from the wolves. Tom understood immediately. He nodded to the older man. "Obliged, Pastor. I'll come for her in an hour." In the small, quiet parsonage, Clara drank hot, sweet tea. And she talked. She told Pastor Hollis everything. The old man sat in his armchair, steepling his fingers. He didn't interrupt. When she finished, he sighed, a heavy, tired sound. "Mrs. Bennet," he said softly, "this is a small town. The people mean well, but their tongues are sharp. They will talk about you, living out there with Tom." Clara looked down at her cup. "I know. But hear me well," the pastor continued, leaning forward. "Tom Merrick is a good man. The best of us, maybe. He carries a heavy grief. Lost his wife and baby girl to the cholera back in Kansas. He won't harm you. If you need a safe harbor while you figure out your path, you are safe under his roof. Don't let the gossip of idle folks chase you into the cold." Clara nodded. For the first time since she left Missouri, she felt a sliver of real safety. When it was time to leave, Clara walked out onto the parsonage porch. A young woman was waiting at the bottom of the steps. She wore a simple blue dress, had ink stains on her fingers. "Mrs. Bennet," the young woman said. "I'm Ruth Caldwell. I teach the school here." Clara gripped her walking stick. "Miss Caldwell." Ruth walked up the steps. She didn't hesitate. She reached out and took Clara's free hand, gave it a firm squeeze. "I heard them talking," Ruth said, her voice fierce and low. "I just wanted you to know. There was another woman in this town who went looking for a husband that never came back. She teaches school now. She lives alone, and she's doing just fine. You will be fine too, no matter what you find at the end of the road." Clara looked at the young teacher, and finally, a single tear broke loose and slid down her cheek. Tom pulled the wagon up a minute later. He helped Clara back onto the seat. They rode out of Pine Crossing in silence. The sun was starting to dip behind the mountains, painting the sky in streaks of bruised orange and purple. The wind picked up, biting at their coats. Halfway back to the ranch, Tom spoke. He didn't look at her. He kept his eyes on the road. "Your feet will heal in a week or two," he said. "I know. When they do, I'll take you." Clara looked at him. "Take me where?" "Denver," Tom said. "Mr. Merrick, I can't ask you to do that. You have a ranch. You have work." "You aren't asking," Tom replied, his voice steady over the rattle of the wagon wheels. "I'm offering. There's a difference." He didn't say another word. He didn't need to. In a territory built on broken promises, Clara realized she had finally found a man who meant exactly what he said. A week went by, the kind of week that tests what a person is made of. Clara's feet were finally healing. The deep cuts had closed up. The swelling went down. She was still limping, but she wasn't helpless anymore. Out here, being helpless was a sin. She proved it on a Tuesday. Winter was coming. You could smell it in the air, a sharp metallic tang right before the sun came up. Tom had butchered a hog the day before. Now it was time to smoke the meat. The smokehouse was a small, windowless shack behind the barn, built tight, smelled of old grease and hickory. Clara stepped inside. Tom was hanging slabs of belly meat on the iron hooks. "You're cutting it too thick," Clara said. Tom stopped. He turned and looked at her. Clara walked over. She didn't ask for permission. She took the heavy knife from the block. "You leave it that thick. The smoke won't penetrate the center. It'll rot by February. You have to slice it leaner, like this." She worked the blade. Clean, precise strokes. Tom watched her. "Where did you learn to do that?" "My mother," Clara said. Her voice was steady. "She taught me everything a woman needs to survive a hard winter. She died when I was 17. I married Elias 2 years later." She slammed the knife down into the butcher block. It stuck there, quivering. I thought I married him so I wouldn't have to be alone. I realize now, I've been alone ever since the preacher said amen. It was the first time she had spoken of Elias with anger, not sadness, not shock. Pure, hot anger. It felt good. It felt like blood rushing back into a numb limb. Tom didn't offer a platitude. He just fed another log into the fire pit, green hickory. It hissed, sending up a thick, fragrant cloud. The cholera came through Kansas in '78, Tom said. His voice was quiet, almost lost in the crackle of the fire. But Clara heard him. She stopped moving. My wife, Caroline, she was a good woman, daughter of a preacher. We had a little girl, Mary, 3 years old with hair the color of wheat. Tom stared into the flames. The fever took them both in the same week. I dug the graves myself. The ground was frozen hard. Clara couldn't speak. The smoke stung her eyes, but that wasn't why they were watering. Tom reached up. He ran a rough thumb along the jagged scar on his left cheek. People see this, he said, and they think I got caught in a bad scrape, an accident. But it wasn't. He turned to face her. 3 months after I buried them, a neighbor's barn caught fire. Lightning strike. I rode over to help. I ran inside to pull out the horses. A flaming beam came down, caught me across the face, pinned me to the dirt. Tom swallowed hard. I didn't try to push it off, Clara. I just lay there. I wanted the fire to take me. I wanted it all to be over. The silence in the smokehouse was heavier than the smoke. But you didn't die, Clara whispered. No, neighbor dragged me out by my boots. The Lord didn't let me burn. He gave me this scar instead, reminding me I wasn't done yet, told me I had to stay, figure out why. Clara looked at this massive, scarred, gentle man. Have you figured it out? She asked. Tom looked right back. I think so. Yeah. He didn't say anything else. He didn't make a pass at her. He didn't try to hold her hand. He just gave her his deepest, ugliest truth. Because she had given him hers. 2 days later, the truth came calling for Clara. Tom had ridden into Pine Crossing for grain. When he came back, he didn't pull the wagon up to the barn. He stopped right at the front porch. He climbed down. He had a piece of paper in his hand. Clara was sweeping the porch. She stopped. She knew the look on his face. It was the look of a man carrying bad news. I wrote to the postmaster in Denver last week, Tom said. Asked if a man named Elias Bennett was collecting mail down there. He held out the paper. Clara took it. The handwriting was cramped and official. Mr. Merrick, Elias Bennett is currently residing at 212 Pearl Street, Denver. He is employed as a barkeep at the Silver Dollar Saloon. He lives there with a woman named Margaret Reeves. He introduces her to the town as his wife. Clara stopped reading. His wife. The words didn't make sense. They were English, but they read like a foreign language. Wife. She was his wife. She was the one who had birthed his children. She was the one who had walked 400 miles until her feet bled. Clara, Tom said quietly. She folded the letter, deliberately, making the creases sharp. Excuse me, she said. She walked off the porch, across the dirt yard, into the barn. She found a bale of hay in the darkest corner. She sat down. She put her face in her hands. She didn't scream. She didn't throw anything. She just sat there, letting the reality wash over her. He wasn't dead. He wasn't lost. He hadn't fallen on hard times. He just found someone else. And he threw his old family away like scraps to a dog. 10 minutes passed. When Clara walked out of the barn, the sun was sitting low on the horizon. Tom was still standing by the wagon. He hadn't moved an inch. Clara walked up to him. Her eyes were dry. Her spine was straight as an iron rod. I need to go to Denver, she said. I'll hitch a fresh team, Tom replied immediately. We can make the train tomorrow. No, not we. Me. I am going to Denver. Tom frowned. Clara, you shouldn't go down there alone. A town like that. I walked out of Missouri alone, Clara cut in. Her voice was pure steel. I crossed the plains alone. I am going to Denver alone. I am going to look that coward in the eye. I am going to tell him his children no longer have a father. And then I'm going to find a judge. The law in this territory allows a woman to divorce a man for abandonment. I am going to cut him out of my life, legally and permanently. Tom stared at her. He saw the fire in her eyes, and he respected it. All right, Tom said, you go alone, but you aren't walking to the station. I'll take you to Pine Crossing. I'll buy your ticket, round trip. Clara softened just a fraction. I can't ask you for the money. You aren't asking. I'm paying. Tom tipped his hat back. And you will come back here. When it's done, if you want to. Clara looked at the cabin, at the smokehouse, at the man standing in front of her. If you want me to, she said. I do. The train to Denver was loud. It smelled of coal dust, unwashed bodies, and cheap tobacco. Clara sat by the window, watching the landscape blur. The Wyoming plains gave way to the jagged, looming foothills of Colorado. She was wearing a dark blue cotton dress. Tom had bought it for her at the general store in Pine Crossing. He didn't buy it to be romantic. He bought it because the dress she arrived in was ruined and she needed armor. A woman going to war couldn't wear rags. She had a piece of paper in her pocket. On it, she had written down every single thing she wanted to say to Elias. She had rehearsed it. Every cutting word. Every accusation. Denver was a shock to the senses. It wasn't a town. It was a beast. Wagons clattered over cobblestones. Brick buildings stood 3 stories high. Men in suits walked past miners covered in dirt. Clara didn't flinch. She asked a policeman for directions. She walked down to 212 Pearl Street. It was a narrow 2-story boarding house with peeling gray paint. There was a small porch out front. A woman was standing on the porch. She was wrestling a wet sheet into a wooden wash tub. She looked tired. Her blonde hair was escaping from a messy bun. She was maybe 35, and her belly was swollen. About 4 months pregnant. Clara stopped at the bottom of the steps. Her heart, which had been beating so fiercely, suddenly slowed down. "Excuse me," Clara said. The woman looked up, wiping soap suds from her forehead with the back of her wrist. "Yes? Are you Margaret Reeves?" The woman nodded. "I am. Can I help you with something?" Clara looked at the pregnant belly, then at the dark circles under Margaret's eyes. She had come here expecting a villain, a homewrecker, a woman who had stolen her life. Instead, she saw a tired woman doing laundry. "My name is Clara Bennett," she said quietly. "I am the legal wife of Elias Bennett. We were married in 1872 in Missouri. We have 2 children together. He never divorced me." Margaret dropped the sheet. It fell into the muddy water with a wet slap. All the color drained from the woman's face. She looked like she was about to faint. "No," Margaret whispered. She grabbed the porch rail. "No, that's a lie. He showed me the papers." Clara stepped up onto the porch. She didn't yell. She didn't strike the woman. "Can we go inside?" Clara asked. Margaret led her into a small, cramped parlor. Her hands were shaking violently. She went to a drawer, pulled out a folded document, and shoved it at Clara. "Look," Margaret cried, tears spilling down her cheeks. "Look right there. It's a court paper. From Missouri. It says he's divorced. It says his wife left him for another man." Clara looked at the paper. The seal was drawn in ink. The signature of the judge was in Elias's handwriting. It was a crude, pathetic forgery. "Margaret," Clara said gently. She handed the paper back. "This is fake. He made it himself." Margaret collapsed into a chair. She buried her face in her hands and sobbed, the kind of deep, chest-heaving sobs of a woman whose entire world had just caved in. Clara stood there. The anger she had been carrying for weeks vanished. If she went to the law right now, Elias would be arrested for bigamy. He'd go to territorial prison for 5 years. And Margaret? Margaret would be left on the street. A ruined woman with a bastard child in a city that didn't forgive women for the sins of men. Clara walked over. She placed a hand on Margaret's trembling shoulder. "You didn't know," Clara said. "You're not to blame for this." Margaret looked up, her eyes red and puffy. "You don't hate me?" "I hate him," Clara said, her voice dropping to a low, cold whisper. "I don't have enough hate left over to give to you, but you need to know the truth. That baby you're carrying, it will be his third child, not his first. My son and daughter deserve to know they have a sibling, and your child deserves to know its father is a liar." Margaret nodded slowly, wiping her face. "What are you going to do?" "I'm going to fix it." 3 hours later, Clara walked through the swinging doors of the Silver Dollar Saloon. It was mid-afternoon. The place was mostly empty, smelling of stale beer and sawdust. A man was behind the long mahogany bar, polishing a glass. Brown hair, slight build, Elias. Clara stopped 10 feet away. Elias looked up. He froze. The glass slipped from his hand and shattered on the floorboards. He opened his mouth, closed it. He looked like he was seeing a ghost. And maybe he was. The Clara he left behind was a scared, submissive girl in Missouri. The woman standing in front of him now was forged from Wyoming iron. "Clara," he finally choked out. How did you find me?" "I walked," she said. She didn't yell. She didn't cause a scene. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a legal document Mr. Abernathy, the lawyer in Pine Crossing, had drawn up for her. She walked to the bar, slapped it down on the wood. "I met Margaret," Clara said. Elias flinched. He looked around the empty saloon in a panic. "Clara, please, let me explain. The money dried up and I couldn't face you." "Shut up!" She didn't raise her voice, but the command was absolute. Elias snapped his mouth shut. "You are going to sign this paper," Clara said. "It is a legal surrender. You are giving up all rights to Samuel and Lily. You will never contact them. You will never come near them. And it grants me a full divorce on the grounds of total abandonment." Elias stared at the paper. "Clara, I'm their father." "You're a sperm donor who sold their house for a train ticket," Clara hissed, leaning over the bar. Her eyes were black with fury. "Sign the damn paper, Elias, or I walk out those doors, find the nearest marshal, and hand him Margaret's forged divorce decree. You'll spend the next 5 years breaking rocks in a territorial prison for bigamy, and Margaret will be out on the street with your child." Elias swallowed hard, his hands shook. He looked at Clara. He searched her face for a trace of the girl who used to love him. There was nothing left, just ashes. He reached under the bar, grabbed an ink pen. He signed his name. Clara took the paper. She blew on the ink to dry it. Then she folded it and put it in her pocket. "Have a good life, Elias," she said. She turned and walked out. She didn't look back. The train ride back to Cheyenne was long. It was dark by the time they hit the Wyoming border. Clara sat by the window, watching her own reflection in the glass. She reached into her small satchel. She pulled out the wooden cigar box Tom had found under the floorboards. She opened it, bypassed the lock of hair, bypassed the drawing. She picked up the sealed envelope. The letter Elias had written back in March. The letter he was too much of a coward to send. Clara looked at her name written on the front. She didn't open it. She didn't need to hear his excuses. She didn't need his apologies. An apology delivered 6 months too late isn't a gift. It's just garbage the dead ask you to carry for them. Clara grabbed the edge of the envelope. She ripped it in half. Then she ripped it again, and again, until it was just a handful of confetti. She unlatched the train window, pushed it up. The freezing night wind whipped into the cabin. Clara held her hand out the window, and she opened her fingers. The wind caught the pieces of paper. They scattered into the black night, vanishing instantly, gone forever. Clara closed the window. She sat back in her seat. She closed her eyes. For the first time in 18 months, she took a full, deep breath. She had won. The drought was over. Her children were hers, and the past was dead. She thought it was finally over. She had no idea that the real fight hadn't even begun. The train hissed into Pine Crossing just as the sun broke over the eastern ridge. Steam rolled thick across the wooden platform. Clara stepped down. She held her small satchel in both hands. She was exhausted. Her bones ached from the hard wooden seats, but her mind was clear. Clearer than it had been in 18 months. She looked down the platform. He was there. Tom Merrick stood leaning against a support beam near the ticket office. Hat pulled low, collar turned up against the morning chill. He hadn't known what day she was coming back, which meant he had driven the wagon into town every single morning, just to wait, just to see if she was on that train. Clara walked toward him. Tom pushed off the beam. He didn't rush. He didn't make a scene. He just walked up and took her satchel. "You okay?" he asked. Clara looked at him, at the scar, at the steady gray eyes. "I'm okay," she said. "It's done." They didn't hug. Out here in the open, people didn't do that. But as they walked to the wagon, Tom stayed close. Just an inch between their shoulders, a silent, solid wall against the rest of the world. On the ride back to Red Hollow, Clara told him everything. She told him about Margaret, about the forged papers, about the baby, and about the saloon. Tom listened. He let the horses find their own pace. "You were easy on her," Tom finally said. "On Margaret. A lot of women wouldn't have been." "I wasn't being easy," Clara said, staring out at the rolling yellow grass. "I just saw her, really saw her. If I had been in her shoes, I would have believed him too. We aren't enemies, Tom. We're just two women who got tricked by the same snake." Tom nodded slowly. "That takes a big heart, Clara." "It takes a tired one," she corrected. 2 days later, Clara rode back into Pine Crossing. She needed to make it official. She walked into Mr. Abernathy's office, the local lawyer. The room smelled of old paper, leather bindings, and pipe tobacco. Abernathy was an older man, wore thick spectacles. He took the signed surrender document Clara handed him. He read it over, then he pushed his spectacles up the bridge of his nose. He frowned. "Mrs. Bennett," Abernathy said slowly, "I have a question for you." "All right. The ranch out at Red Hollow. Your husband claimed that land under the Homestead Act back in '80, didn't he?" "He did," Clara said. Abernathy leaned back in his leather chair. He tapped a pencil against his desk. It sounded loud in the quiet room. "The Homestead Act of 1862, Abernathy began, his voice taking on a heavy, professional tone. "It has a very specific clause. If the man making the claim is married, the land does not belong solely to him. It belongs to the union, to the husband and the wife." Clara just looked at him. She didn't understand, not yet. "Mrs. Bennett, your husband did not have the legal right to sell that land, not without your signature on the deed." The room went dead silent. "What does that mean?" Clara asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "It means," Abernathy said softly, "that the sale to Tom Merrick is void. Legally speaking, it never happened. That land, all 160 acres of it, belongs to you." Clara stopped breathing. The word didn't even cover it. The ground had just opened up and swallowed everything. She owned the land, which meant Tom didn't. He had paid $340. He had patched the roof, smoked the meat, fixed the barn. He had built a life out there. And legally, he had nothing. He was a trespasser on her property. Clara walked out of the office in a daze. She didn't wait for Tom. She started walking the 8 miles back to the ranch. She needed the time. She needed the rhythm of her own boots on the dirt to think. If she claimed the land, she had a home for her children. Samuel and Lily would have a roof over their heads. But Tom would lose everything. Again. By the time she reached the rise, the sun was sinking, painting the sky in bruised purples and bloody reds. Tom was out in the yard chopping wood for the night. The heavy axe came down, a clean split. He saw her walking up the road and drove the axe into the stump. He walked out to meet her. He saw her face. "What's wrong?" he asked. Clara didn't dance around it. She wasn't built that way anymore. She told him, right there in the dirt yard. She told him about the Homestead Act, about the deed, about the fact that his $340 was gone, stolen by a ghost, and the ranch belonged to her. Tom stood perfectly still. He looked at the cabin, then at the barn, then at the dirt under his boots. He took a slow, deep breath. "All right," Tom said. Clara blinked. "All right?" "You keep the land, Clara," Tom said. His voice didn't shake. He wasn't angry. He was just resigned. "I'll pack my gear. I can find work down south, or up in Montana. I'm strong enough to start over. You need this place. You've got 2 kids coming." It was the most beautiful, devastating thing she had ever heard. He wasn't going to fight her. He wasn't going to curse his luck. He was just going to hand her the only safe harbor he had left, tip his hat, and walk into the cold. Because he believed she needed it more. Clara looked at this man, really looked at him. "Tom," she said, her voice cracked, "I don't want this land if you aren't on it." Tom looked back at her, stunned. "Dirt doesn't make a person feel safe," Clara said, taking a step toward him. "Deeds and signatures don't make a home. People do. The way you didn't ask me a single question the night I came back, you just made me soup. The way you slept in the freezing barn so I could have a bed, that's a home." She took another step. They were close now. "I'm writing to my cousin next week, having her put Samuel and Lily on a train. They need a home. You helped give them one without even knowing it. I can't repay that by kicking you off your own porch." Tom swallowed hard. "Clara." "I have a proposition," she interrupted. "We sign a new contract, a partnership. The land is mine on paper, but we work it together. We split the profits. We build this place. Together." She looked up into his gray eyes. "As for you and me, we don't need to put a name to it right now. Someday, if you want, we can talk about that. But tonight I just want you to stay." Tom looked at her for a long time. The wind whipped around them, biting through their coats. But neither of them felt the cold. "I'll stay," Tom said softly. They didn't kiss. They didn't fall into each other's arms. They just walked inside, sat by the hearth, and for the first time since she met him, Tom Merrick reached out and rested his hand on the back of her rocking chair. Just resting there, a silent promise. She owned the dirt. But she knew the truth. A home is built by people who choose each other. And the man across the fire had chosen her the very first night he opened his door. Peace is a fragile thing on the frontier. You blink, and it's gone. It lasted exactly 1 week. Clara was out by the smokehouse when she heard the rattle of a buggy. She wiped her hands on her apron and walked around to the front yard. A sleek black buggy was pulled up near the porch. 2 men were sitting in it. One was a stranger in a cheap suit. The other was Silas Thorne, the banker from Pine Crossing. Tom came out of the barn. He held a pitchfork in one hand. His jaw was set tight. He didn't like Silas Thorne. Nobody did. "Mrs. Bennett, Mr. Merrick," Thorne said, his voice slick as oiled leather. He didn't step down from the buggy. "What do you want, Thorne?" Tom asked. Thorne pulled a piece of heavy parchment from his breast pocket. "I come representing the Pine Crossing Bank," Thorne said, unrolling the paper. "Your husband, Mrs. Bennett. Before he supposedly sold this land to Mr. Merrick here, he took out a loan. $800. He used this ranch as collateral." Clara felt her blood run cold. "He never paid a dime," Thorne continued, a cruel little smile playing on his lips. "With interest, the debt sits at $940. I'm afraid the bank is calling the note." Thorne tossed the paper down into the dirt at Tom's boots. "You have 30 days, pay the $940, or the bank forecloses and the sheriff forcibly removes you from the property." He tipped his hat. "Good day." The buggy rattled away, kicking up a cloud of pale dust. Clara stood frozen. $800. She couldn't breathe. Elias hadn't just sold the land out from under her. He had mortgaged it to the hilt first. He had bled the stone dry before throwing it at her feet. Tom picked up the paper. He didn't say a word. He just walked to the barn and started hitching the wagon. They were in Mr. Abernathy's office before noon. Abernathy laid the promissory note flat on his desk. He brought his face close to the paper, his thick spectacles magnifying his eyes. He was quiet for a long time. Then his brow furrowed. Deep trenches lined his forehead. "Something is wrong here," Abernathy muttered. Clara leaned forward. "What is it?" "Look at the date," the lawyer said, pointing a stained finger at the ink. "January 15th, 1881. That's 3 days before he sold the land to Tom." "So?" Tom asked. "Look at the witness signature," Abernathy said. He tapped the bottom corner of the page. Clara read the looping cursive, "Silas Thorne." "Silas Thorne," Abernathy said, leaning back, "cannot legally be the witness to a loan that he himself is issuing as the bank's representative. It's a massive conflict of interest. It borders on fraud." Just then, the door to the office opened. Ruth Caldwell walked in. The young schoolteacher. She worked part-time filing papers for Abernathy to make extra money. She had a heavy ledger book in her arms. "Mr. Abernathy," Ruth said, her eyes wide, "I was down at the county clerk's office, checking the old foreclosure records like you asked." She dropped the heavy ledger onto the desk with a thud. "Silas Thorne has done this before," Ruth said, out of breath. "3 times in the last 7 years. He finds a desperate man, offers him cash off the books, has them sign a blank note, acts as his own witness, and then alters the dates to claim priority on the land." A chill swept through the room. It was a racket, a perfectly legal-looking racket. Thorne was stealing land from struggling families by forging the paperwork trail. "Can we fight him?" Tom asked, his voice low and dangerous. "We can," Abernathy said. "We file a suit for fraud in the territorial court up in Cheyenne. But we need proof. We need the other families to testify. And we need filing fees. The court isn't cheap." Clara looked down at her hands. "I don't have any money left." Tom reached into his pocket. He pulled out a small leather pouch. He opened it and dumped it on the desk, a few silver coins, maybe $12. "That's everything I've got," Tom said. It wasn't enough, not even close. Clara closed her eyes. They had fought so hard, walked so far, and a man in a silk vest was going to take it all away with the stroke of a pen. That evening they held a meeting in the Pine Crossing Church. Pastor Hollis called it. Ruth Caldwell stood up front and explained the ledger, explained how Thorne had stolen 3 farms in the valley. Clara sat in the front pew, looking at her scarred boots. She felt ashamed. She felt like she had brought a curse down on Tom's head. Then Jem Caldwell stood up. Jem was a Civil War veteran, missing 2 fingers on his left hand, lived in a shack bordering Red Hollow. He was a hard man. Didn't talk much. He walked up to the front. He took off his slouch hat, reached inside the brim and pulled out a crumpled wad of greenbacks. He dropped $20 on the communion table. "Thorne tried to pull that trick on my brother 5 years ago," Jem growled. "My brother drank himself to death after he lost the farm. I'm in." A murmur went through the pews. Then Martha Granger stood up. The gossip. The woman who had sneered at Clara just a few weeks ago. Martha marched up the aisle. She opened her coin purse. She dumped $50 in gold and silver onto the table. It sounded like a gunshot in the quiet church. "I run the store," Martha said loudly. "I see who buys flour and who goes hungry. Thorne has been bleeding this town dry. It stops today." One by one, the town stood up. A farmer dropped in $10. A ranch hand pitched in $3. The blacksmith threw down $5. By the end of the night, Pastor Hollis counted the pile. $280, more than enough to hire Abernathy and file the suit in Cheyenne. Clara sat in the pew staring at the money. Tears finally broke free and streamed down her face. Not tears of sorrow, tears of absolute awe. Tom sat next to her. He leaned over and whispered, "These folks aren't doing this because you're pretty, Clara. They aren't doing it for me either. They're doing it because they've been getting pushed around for years. They were just waiting for someone brave enough to push back. You gave them a reason to fight." 3 weeks later, a courtroom in Cheyenne. It was over in 2 hours. When confronted with the ledger and the testimony of 3 ruined farmers, Silas Thorne folded. The territorial judge didn't take kindly to bankers playing fast and loose with the law. The judge voided the $800 loan. He fined Thorne $500 for fraud and revoked his banking charter for 5 years. Thorne walked out of the courtroom a ruined man. Clara and Tom rode back to Pine Crossing. They had won. That night, Martha Granger hosted a dinner at the general store. The whole town came out. There was roasted venison, hot apple cider, fiddle music. Clara looked across the room. Tom was standing near the wood stove talking to Jem Coldwell. And Tom was smiling. It was a small smile, but it reached his gray eyes. It erased the harsh lines around his scar. Clara realized she had never actually seen him smile before. It was a victory, a real, honest victory. Late that night, back at the quiet cabin, Clara sat at the small wooden table. The fire was dying down to red embers. She dipped a pen in ink. She pulled a piece of paper toward her. "Dear Hattie," she wrote, "I have a home now. It is safe. Please put Samuel and Lily on the Union Pacific train next week. Tell the conductor their mother will be waiting for them at the station." She folded the letter. She smiled. She thought the fight was finally over. She didn't know it yet, but the devil who started this whole story still had one card left to play. And right at that very moment, 300 miles to the south, a man with a desperate, wild look in his eye was riding west, riding hard. On a horse he had stolen from a man he had left bleeding by the side of the road. Elias Bennett was coming back. It started with a sound you could barely hear over the wind. Early November. The air had teeth now. Frost lay thick and white on the Wyoming grass, crunching like broken glass underfoot. Clara was up before the sun. She was standing by the cast-iron stove, waiting for the water to boil. Tom was already out in the barn, graining the horses. Then it came, a scraping sound at the front door. Low, weak, like a stray dog scratching to get out of the cold. Clara paused. She set the tin coffee pot down. She walked to the heavy oak door. She slid the iron latch back and pulled it open. A ghost was standing on her porch. At least that's what she thought for one wild, breathless second. It was a boy, small, shivering so hard his teeth clicked together. His clothes were stiff with dried mud and coal dust. His face was streaked black. He was clutching a tiny canvas sack to his chest like it was keeping him alive. Clara stared. Her mind couldn't make sense of it. The boy looked up. His eyes were wide, terrified, but they were her eyes. "Mama?" Clara hit her knees. The hard wood of the porch slammed into her bones, but she didn't feel it. "Sam," she gasped. "Sam, oh dear God, Samuel!" She threw her arms around him. He smelled of smoke, sweat, and cheap tobacco. He was freezing. He buried his filthy face into her neck and let out a sound that broke Clara in half, a dry, ragged sob. Tom came up from the barn. He stopped at the edge of the porch. He took one look at the boy, dropped the pitchfork, and stepped inside to build up the fire. It took an hour to get Samuel warm. A hot bath, a bowl of oatmeal. He sat wrapped in Tom's heavy wool blanket by the hearth. Slowly, in broken little pieces, the story came out. It was a nightmare. Cousin Hattie had died, a sudden fever, just 2 weeks ago. Hattie's husband, Jeb, was a hard man who didn't want 2 extra mouths to feed. He packed 4-year-old Lily into a wagon and sent her off to an aunt in St. Louis. But Samuel didn't go. Samuel ran, a 6-year-old boy. He took $3 silver from a jar in Hattie's kitchen. He walked to the train depot. He lied to the conductor, saying his mother was in the next car. He hid under seats. He rode in the rattling, freezing cargo cars. When he got to Cheyenne, he hitched a ride with a freighter heading north to Pine Crossing. He remembered the name, Red Hollow, because Clara had written it in a letter. "I came to find you, Mama," Samuel whispered, his eyes drooping shut from exhaustion. "I told Lily I'd find you." Clara sat on the floor beside him. She held his small, dirty hand against her cheek. She was crying, silent, heavy tears. Her 6-year-old boy had crossed 1,000 miles of untamed country, alone. Tom stood in the doorway. He looked at Samuel, then he looked at Clara. His gray eyes were shining. He was looking at the boy, but Clara knew he was seeing Mary, his own little girl, the one he couldn't save. 3 days passed. Samuel slept for 2 of them. When he woke, Tom took him under his wing, taught him how to carry a bucket without spilling, taught him how to brush down a horse. Samuel started following the big scarred man like a shadow. He started calling him Mr. Tom. Clara wrote a frantic letter to St. Louis, arranging for Lily to be brought west immediately. Things felt safe, but the frontier doesn't let you keep safe for very long. On the 4th day, Jem Coldwell rode up to the cabin. He didn't bother hitching his horse. He swung down, his face tight. "Tom," Jem called out. "Clara." They walked out onto the porch. "Got trouble," Jem said. "Stranger in town. Drinking heavy down at the saloon." He was asking around about Clara Bennett, asking who owned Red Hollow. Clara's blood turned to ice water. "Who?" Tom asked. Didn't give a name, but he looked desperate, thin, wore a ragged coat, kept muttering about how somebody stole his land. It was Elias. Margaret must have thrown him out. The forged divorce, the lies, the bigamy, it had caught up to him. He had nothing left. No money, no woman. So he had come back to the one thing he thought he still owned. "Jem," Tom said, his voice deadly calm. "Go get the sheriff." Jem nodded. He spurred his horse and rode hard back toward town. "Clara," Tom said, turning to her, "take Samuel. Go down into the root cellar. Don't come out until I open that door." Clara didn't argue. She grabbed Samuel's hand and ran to the side of the house. She pulled the heavy wooden doors open and hurried the boy down into the dark, earthy-smelling cellar. She left the doors cracked. Just an inch. Enough to see, enough to hear. She waited. Late afternoon. The sky turned a bruised, ugly gray. A rider came up the road. He was swaying in the saddle. Elias. He looked like a ghost. His face was hollowed out. A thick, unkempt beard covered his jaw. He reeked of cheap whiskey even from 50 yards away. Tom stepped off the porch. He held a Winchester rifle, angled down. Casual, but ready. Elias pulled the horse to a halt. He looked at Tom. He looked at the house. "Where is she?" Elias slurred. He slid off the horse. He stumbled, almost falling into the dirt. "She doesn't want to see you," Tom said. "This is my land," Elias screamed. It was a pathetic, high-pitched sound, the sound of a cornered rat. "That bitch in Denver threw me out. My baby died in her belly, and it's Clara's fault. If she hadn't come down there—" "Shut your mouth," Tom cut in. His voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the wind like a razor. Elias staggered forward. He reached into his coat. He pulled out a revolver. It was shaking in his hand. He was too drunk to aim straight, but at this distance he didn't need to. "I need money," Elias yelled. "I need this land. I can sell it again. I can get a fresh start." Tom didn't raise the rifle. He knew a twitch would get him shot. "You don't own a single blade of grass here, Elias. Put the gun away. Ride out." Elias let out a wild, broken laugh. He reached into his other pocket. He pulled out a glass bottle stuffed with a rag. A Molotov. He must have made it in town. He struck a match off his boot heel, lit the rag, and threw it. It smashed against the side of the wooden barn. Flames roared to life instantly, climbing the dry wood like a hungry animal. "No!" Tom yelled. There were horses in there, the winter feed, everything they needed to survive the snows. Tom dropped the rifle and sprinted toward the barn. Elias raised the revolver. Clara screamed from the cellar. The gunshot was deafening. Tom stumbled. He spun around, clutching his right shoulder. Blood bloomed instantly across his flannel shirt, dark and thick. He hit the dirt hard. "Tom!" Clara shoved the cellar doors open. She scrambled out into the yard. Elias turned. He saw her. He racked the hammer back on the revolver. He pointed it right at her chest. "You ruined me, Clara," he sobbed. He was completely unhinged now, beyond reason. "You ruined my life." Clara stood still. She didn't look at the gun. She looked at the pathetic, broken man she used to love. Elias tightened his finger on the trigger. Then a small figure darted out from the cellar. Samuel. He ran faster than Clara could catch him. He planted himself right in front of her, a tiny, dirty shield between his mother and the barrel of the gun. Samuel looked Elias dead in the eye. "Don't shoot my mom," the 6-year-old said. His voice was shaking, but he didn't move an inch. Elias froze. He looked at the boy with his eyes, the boy he had abandoned for a few $100, the boy who was now willing to take a bullet for the mother Elias was trying to kill. The silence that followed was heavier than a mountain. Elias's arm began to shake. The revolver suddenly looked too heavy to hold. It slipped from his fingers, hit the dirt with a dull thud. Elias dropped to his knees. He buried his face in his hands, and he wailed, a loud, ugly, tearing sound. "Sam!" Elias sobbed. "Sam, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." Hoofbeats thundered into the yard. Jem Coldwell had arrived. Sheriff Tate was right behind him. Jem didn't hesitate. He swung down, leveled his shotgun at Elias's head, and kicked the revolver out of reach. "Move an inch, Bennett, and I'll end you right here." Sheriff Tate hauled the crying man to his feet and slapped iron cuffs on his wrists. Clara didn't watch them. She ran to Tom. The fire was catching the roof of the barn, but people were arriving. Men from town. Martha Granger, Ruth. They brought buckets. They formed a line from the well. Clara dropped to her knees in the dirt beside Tom. His face was pale. The wound in his shoulder was bad, bleeding freely, but the bullet had passed clean through. Martha Granger broke from the bucket line. She knelt down, pressing a thick wad of clean cloth hard against Tom's shoulder. Tom groaned, his teeth gritted. Samuel crept over. He knelt in the dirt on Tom's left side. The boy reached out. He took Tom's large, calloused hand in both of his tiny ones. He held on tight. "Mr. Tom?" Samuel whispered, tears cutting clean tracks through the soot on his cheeks. "Are you going to die?" Tom opened his eyes. He looked at the boy. Then he looked up at Clara. The orange light from the burning barn flickered across his scarred face. Tom squeezed the boy's hand. "No, Sam," Tom breathed, forcing the words past the pain. "I'm not. I've decided I'm done dying." 3 weeks. That's how long it took for the smoke to fully clear from Red Hollow. The days got shorter. The wind turned bitter. But the ranch didn't die. It came to life. Tom's arm was in a sling. The doctor in Pine Crossing said he was lucky. No shattered bones. He just needed time. He couldn't swing an axe or lift a bale of hay. So Clara did it. She chopped the wood. She hauled the water. She proved that the iron in her spine wasn't just for show, and she wasn't alone. Lily had arrived from St. Louis. A quiet, shy 4-year-old girl clutching a ragged cloth doll. When she stepped off the train and saw Clara, she didn't say a word. She just buried her face in Clara's skirt and refused to let go for 2 days. And then there was the town. Every morning at sunrise, a wagon rolled up from Pine Crossing. Jem Coldwell, Pastor Hollis, 3 other farmers, they came to build. Elias's fire had gutted the barn. But the community wasn't going to let Tom and Clara face the Wyoming winter without shelter. Jem brought lumber. The blacksmith donated nails. For 2 weeks, the sound of hammers ringing against wood echoed across the valley. Clara paid them the only way she could. She cooked. She made giant pots of stew. She baked heavy loaves of bread. She poured hot coffee until her wrists ached. She fed the men who were rebuilding her life. One crisp Tuesday morning, Clara was on the porch peeling potatoes. A horse trotted into the yard. Sheriff Tate. He climbed down, took off his hat. He had a manila folder in his hand. He looked uncomfortable. Clara stood up. She wiped her hands on her apron. Tom walked out from the cabin, his right arm bound tight to his chest. "Morning, Sheriff," Tom said. "Morning, Tom, ma'am." Tate nodded. He looked at the folder. "I got a wire back from Missouri yesterday about Elias." Clara stiffened. "Is he going to prison?" "He is," Tate said, "but not for what he did here." The sheriff opened the folder. He didn't look happy about what he had to say. When we wired his name back east, Tate explained, the Missouri marshals got very interested. Turns out Elias didn't come out west to claim land. He wasn't looking for a fresh start. Tate looked Clara in the eye. In early 1880, right before he left, Elias got into a dispute over a poker debt. He shot a man dead in a back alley. Name of Robert Haynes. Left a wife and 2 kids behind. Elias ran before the law could put it together. The silence on the porch was deafening. A murderer. Clara felt the porch boards tilt beneath her boots. 18 months. She had spent 18 months mourning him, believing he was a good man trying to build a future, believing he just fell on hard times. He was a killer on the run. He sold her house to buy a train ticket to escape the hangman. The marshals are coming to get him, Tate finished quietly. They'll extradite him to Missouri. He'll stand trial. And, ma'am, he will hang. The sheriff tipped his hat and rode away. Clara stood frozen. The wind whipped her skirt around her ankles. Tom didn't try to touch her. He just stood near her, a silent anchor. I didn't know, Clara whispered, the horror creeping up her throat. I swear to God, Tom, I slept next to him. I had his children, and I didn't know he was capable of that. I know, Tom said softly. Clara turned to him. Her eyes were suddenly fierce, blazing. I won't let him do it, she said. Do what? Define us, she pointed a finger at the ground. I didn't marry a murderer. I married a boy I thought I loved. He chose to become a monster later. I'm not carrying his sins, and my children are not carrying his shadow. He is dead to me, today, right now. She turned back to the bucket of potatoes, picked up her knife, and started peeling. Tom watched her. The corner of his mouth twitched up. It was the deepest look of respect a man could give a woman. That evening, just before dark, the hammering was done for the day. The men had gone back to town. The new barn frame stood stark and proud against the twilight sky. Clara walked out to the front gate. She stood under the single pine tree, the same spot she had stood on her first night here. Tom walked out to join her. He stood next to her, looking out over the rolling plains. You want to tell the kids? Tom asked. No, Clara said immediately. When they're older, someday. Right now, Samuel just needs to know his father chose to leave. Lily doesn't even remember him. The truth can wait until their shoulders are broad enough to carry it. Tom nodded. They stood in silence for a long moment. Clara, Tom said. His voice had changed. It was lower, rougher. Clara turned to look at him. Tom didn't get down on one knee. Out here, the ground was too hard for that kind of theater. He just looked at her. I need to ask you something, he said. And I don't want you to say yes because of the land, or the kids, or the town. He took a slow breath. I want you to answer for yourself. Will you marry me? Clara looked at his scarred face, at the sling holding his injured arm, at the gray eyes that had seen the bottom of the world and decided to climb back up. She didn't cry. She smiled. A real brilliant smile. I will, Clara said. Tom exhaled, a long, shuddering breath. But you need to know something first, Clara said, stepping closer. I am not marrying you because you saved me. You didn't save me. I saved myself the day I started walking. I know that, Tom said. I am marrying you, Clara whispered, because you are the only man in my entire life who ever bothered to ask me what I wanted, and then actually waited for me to answer. Tom reached out with his good arm. He pulled her against his chest. He buried his face in her hair. It wasn't a desperate grab. It was a landing. 2 weeks later. They didn't go to the church in town. They did it right there, in the cabin kitchen. The fire was roaring in the hearth. The smell of Martha Granger's cinnamon apple pie filled the room. Pastor Hollis stood by the wooden table. Jem Coldwell stood behind Tom. Ruth Caldwell had braided dried wildflowers into a small bouquet for Clara. Samuel and Lily stood right beside their mother. Samuel was holding Tom's left hand in a death grip. He looked so proud you'd think he was the one getting married. Clara wore the blue dress. When it came time for the vows, they didn't use the ones written in the book. Tom looked at Clara. His voice was steady. "Clara, I thought my life ended 3 years ago. I was wrong. I was just waiting for a knock on the door." He looked down at Samuel, then at Lily. "I don't promise to be perfect. I tried that once and the world broke anyway, but I promise you this. Every morning when I wake up, I will choose you. I will choose Samuel. I will choose Lily. Family isn't made of blood, it's made of choice. And I chose you the night you fell on my porch." Clara gripped his hand. "Tom," she said, her voice clear and ringing, "I came here barefoot, with nothing but a broken heart and a lot of anger. You opened a door for a woman you owed absolutely nothing to. You gave me a safe place to heal. I can't pay that debt in one lifetime, but I promise I will spend every day of the rest of my life trying." Pastor Hollis smiled. He raised his hands. "Then, by the power vested in me and the grace of the good Lord above, I pronounce you husband and wife." Tom leaned in. He kissed her, not a frantic kiss, a promise sealed in fire and survival. The room erupted in cheers. Jem uncorked a jug of apple cider. Samuel picked Lily up and spun her around until they both fell over, laughing. Clara looked around the small, warm kitchen. She looked at the faces of the people who had fought for her. She looked at her children, safe and smiling. She looked at her husband. "They say you are born into a family." Clara knew better. Family is something you build, plank by plank, nail by nail, choice by choice. Sometimes the strongest homes in the world are built by broken people who decided, on one ordinary night, to just stop being strangers. A year. Out here on the frontier, a year can bleed a person dry. It can age you 10 years. It can bury you under 6 feet of hard, unforgiving dirt. Or if you're brave enough to hold on, it can bring you back to life. It was the autumn of 1882. Exactly 1 year since Clara stumbled up the dirt road to Red Hollow. The ranch didn't look like a place touched by fire anymore. It looked like a fortress. The new barn stood tall, painted a deep rust red. There were 2 sturdy corrals, a small garden plot turned over for the winter, and over on the east side of the yard, a tiny apple sapling was staked into the ground. It wouldn't bear fruit for 7 years, but planting it? That was a promise that they weren't going anywhere. Clara stepped out onto the porch. She moved a little slower these days. She paused, resting a hand on the gentle swell of her belly. 5 months along. Tom was sitting on the top step. He was working saddle soap into a worn leather bridle. He looked up at her. The morning sun caught the jagged scar on his cheek. It didn't look angry anymore. It just looked like a part of him. He smiled, a slow, easy smile. "Mail came," Tom said. He reached into his vest pocket and handed her an envelope. It bore a Missouri postmark. Heavy, expensive paper. A lawyer's seal stamped in wax on the back. Clara sat down in the rocking chair. She broke the seal. Elias was dead. The Missouri marshals hadn't wasted any time. He was tried, convicted, and hanged by the neck in late August. Clara read the words. She didn't feel a rush of victory. She didn't feel a crushing blow of grief. She just felt quiet. The final ghost of her old life had finally been laid to rest. The letter went on to detail Elias's estate. A man's entire existence on this earth boiled down to a ledger. He left behind a cheap brass pocket watch and $22 in cash. By order of the court, the money was to be split equally. $11 to Clara, his legal widow. $11 to Mrs. Haynes, the widow of the man Elias had murdered in the alley. Clara folded the letter. She looked out over the yard. Samuel, 7 years old now, was chasing a barn cat. Lily was sitting on a stump trying to write her name in the dirt with a stick. Clara stood up. She walked into the cabin, sat at the kitchen table, and pulled out a fresh sheet of paper. She dipped her pen in the inkwell. She didn't write back to the lawyer. She wrote to Mrs. Haynes. Dear Mrs. Haynes, you don't know me, and I don't know you, but our lives have been chained together by a man who took too much from both of us. My husband stole your children's father. I don't have the words to apologize for him. I won't even try. But I want you to know this. I am sending you my half of the money. Enclosed is $11. I have enough. We have enough. My children have a father now, a real one. They have a home. Your children were robbed of theirs, and I cannot fix that. But maybe $11 buys a good pair of winter boots for the older one, or school books for the younger. I am not writing this to ask for your forgiveness. No one has the right to demand grace from someone they didn't directly hurt. I am writing this because a year ago, I walked 400 miles barefoot because I believed my children deserved a future. I know you believe the same for yours. If your children ever want to write to my Samuel and Lily, let them. We cannot fix the past. But maybe we can refuse to hand our children the heavy burden of our hatred. Sincerely, Clara Merrick. Tom walked up behind her. He rested his heavy hands on her shoulders. He read the letter silently. He didn't ask her to change a single word. He leaned down and kissed the top of her head. You are the strongest woman I've ever known, Tom whispered. No, Clara said, leaning back against him. I just decided not to let a bad man write the end of my story. Early the next morning, just before the sun broke over the eastern ridge, the air was biting cold. Frost coated the grass like diamond dust. Clara walked out to the front gate. She stood under the lone pine tree, the exact spot she had stopped a year ago, bleeding and broken. She reached down. She unlaced her boots. She stepped out of them. She stood barefoot in the freezing grass. It wasn't an act of desperation this time. It was a choice. A silent tribute to the woman who had almost died on this road so that the woman standing here today could live. The heavy cabin door opened. Tom walked out. He didn't ask what she was doing. He didn't tell her to come inside. He walked up behind her, took off his heavy wool coat, and draped it over her shoulders. He wrapped his good arm around her waist and pulled her back against his chest, keeping her warm. The cabin door banged open again. Samuel ran out. He didn't have his coat on. He was holding a piece of paper. Mama, Samuel yelled, his breath pluming in the cold air. I wrote a letter to Daniel and Ellen Haynes. I told them they got a baby sister coming in Missouri. And I told them if they ever need anything, they got family in Wyoming. Clara dropped to her knees in the cold grass. She threw her arms around her boy. Tom stood over them. He looked at his wife. He looked at his son. Then he looked out at the horizon as the sun finally crested the mountains, flooding the valley with golden light. I thought my life was over when I lost Caroline and Mary, Tom said quietly. I was wrong. I just needed to say thank you, Clara. Clara looked up at him. For what? For knocking on my door. Clara smiled. I walked 400 miles to find a man who wasn't worth the dirt on his boots. I had no idea I was walking toward the man who was. They say a family is something you're born into, but anyone who has survived the frontier knows better. A family is something you build, plank by plank, choice by choice. A man opens a door when he owes you absolutely nothing. A woman walks through it knowing she might find exactly that, nothing. And together, two strangers decide to build a home out of whatever they find on the other side. That is not a fairy tale. That is a miracle made of ordinary courage, and miracles like that are the only kind that last. If Clara's story moved you tonight, please do 3 things for her and for me. Hit that like button so more women can find this story. Share it with a friend who needs to remember her own strength. And subscribe, because next week I'm bringing you another true-to-life Western romance about a woman who lost everything and found more than she imagined. Tell me in the comments, what moment in Clara's journey touched you the most? Was it the letter she wrote to Mrs. Haynes? Was it Samuel stepping between his mother and a bullet? Or was it the door Tom opened? I read every comment. And remember, Wherever you are tonight, whatever door has closed behind you, there is always another door waiting. Sometimes strangers become family. Sometimes the miracle is just ordinary courage. Until next time, stay kind, stay strong, and good night from the frontier.
Out here on the frontier, stories don't end the way fairy tales do. They don't fade into perfect sunsets or easy, happily ever afters. They settle into something quieter, something earned. And Clara's story, this long, brutal, beautiful journey, leaves us with a truth that cuts deeper than romance and stronger than pain. Because what she found at the end of those 400 miles wasn't the man she thought she loved. It wasn't the life she imagined. It wasn't even justice, at least not at first. What she found was herself, a version of herself that refused to stay broken. A woman who learned that love is not proven by promises whispered in comfort, but by actions taken in hardship. That real love doesn't abandon, doesn't hide, doesn't take. It stands beside you when you have nothing left to give. And maybe that's the first lesson this story leaves behind. Not every ending is a loss, even when it feels like one. Sometimes, losing the wrong person is the only way to make space for the right one. Sometimes, the road that nearly breaks you is the same road that rebuilds you into someone stronger than you ever imagined. But Clara's story isn't just about love between a man and a woman. It's about something deeper. It's about choice. Because family, as this story shows us, isn't always something you're born into. It's something you build through sacrifice, through forgiveness, through the quiet decision to show up for someone every single day. Tom chose Clara when he didn't have to. Clara chose to stay when she could have walked away. And together, they built something stronger than blood, a bond forged in hardship, trust, and compassion. And then there's another truth, maybe the hardest one of all. You are not defined by the worst person you've ever loved. Clara could have carried Elias's shadow for the rest of her life. She could have let his betrayal, his lies, even his sins shape who she became. But she didn't. She made a choice to end that story where it deserved to end and to begin a new one where she stood. That kind of strength, that kind of clarity, it's rare, and it's something every one of us can learn from. Because at the heart of this story is a simple but powerful idea. No matter how far you've walked in the wrong direction, no matter how much you've lost along the way, it is never too late to choose a different ending. So maybe tonight, Clara's journey leaves you with a question, not about her life, but about yours. What are you still holding on to that no longer deserves a place in your story? What door are you afraid to knock on? And what kind of life could be waiting for you? If you found the courage to take that first step forward, out here, on the frontier of life, nothing is guaranteed. Not love, not safety, not even tomorrow. But one thing is always within your reach: the choice to keep going, the choice to rebuild, the choice to believe that even after everything, something better can still be waiting just beyond the next horizon. And sometimes, all it takes to change everything is one more step.